China is on the back foot. It has suffered a double whammy. I can explain it in two words, Hong Kong and Xinjiang, but I have more to say. So let me start by giving you context. For more than a decade now, China has witnessed remarkable and rapid growth. And that's the only China story that the world talked about. The booming economy, the trade, the manufacturing capital of the world, that narrative is now changing. Cracks are beginning to appear in the Great Wall of Chinese propaganda. Its vulnerabilities are becoming more apparent and more public. This story is about China's weaknesses. Two regions, Hong Kong and Xinjiang. Let's start with Hong Kong. It's on fire. A deadly conflict is playing out. It has been for 6 months now. Week after week, protesters continue to pour out onto the streets of Hong Kong. They face everything, water cannons, tear gas, batons, and now even bullets. But they do not stop. They want freedom. This weekend, the scenes became uglier. Universities are the new battlegrounds now. An armored vehicle burst into flames as it tried to break down a barricade created by the protesters. The local police is now threatening deadly force, but Beijing has failed to curb these protests. 2019 is not 1989. Hong Kong is not Tiananmen. Beijing cannot unleash tanks on its people. The world is watching the biggest political challenge to Xi Jinping's authority. And in the middle of this crisis, a major scandal broke. Hundreds of documents leaked from Chinese government offices. What were they about? They were about China's strategy to quote-unquote rewire Muslims. The contents are stunning and very, very damaging. They are about China's mass detention of Uyghurs. How top officials in the government gave orders to create indoctrination camps. It came straight from the top. President Xi Jinping laid the groundwork to jail Muslims by the thousands. It said officials should show, quote-unquote, absolutely no mercy. That was the brief. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you how Xi Jinping's troubles are growing at home and why the time has come for India and the world to take a stand now. First, let's tell you about what's happening in Hong Kong. This is Xi Jinping's biggest nightmare. Since his rise to power 7 years ago, his presidency has always been about complete control. But Hong Kong right now is the opposite of that, completely out of control. Sample these pictures. This is a university in Hong Kong. It looks like a battleground. Front lines of protesters are mounting a serious challenge to the police. In parts, it looked like a medieval war, complete with bows and arrows. The protesters even catapulted stones to keep the police at bay. Then it became worse. The police tried to break a barricade. Their truck was greeted with fireballs. The street was filled with bricks, stones, rubber bullets and tear gas. This is Hong Kong, Asia's business hub, now a war zone. Xi Jinping would define this anarchy. But the protesters have public support. This has turned into an uprising and the president has failed to quell it. We must say that he has only himself to blame for this. China under Xi Jinping has become more authoritative. Hong Kong has felt the oppression, dissent has been suppressed, pro-China lawmakers got prominence, anti-China activists were put in jail. As the anger simmered, a new law was proposed. a law to deport criminal suspects from Hong Kong to China, and that was the proverbial last straw. The citizens of Hong Kong have been at war with their government since 25 weeks and counting. The world has been a mute spectator. This is the biggest challenge, I must repeat, to Xi Jinping's authority. And his government blames the world for it. Beijing sees a foreign hand in Hong Kong, that classic old excuse of helpless governments, their favorite punching bag, the invisible foreign hand. Today, Beijing fielded their top diplomat in Europe. He claimed America and the Great Britain are meddling in Hong Kong.
To those who question external interference in Hong Kong affairs, aren't these facts enough to address their doubts? We would like to tell these external forces solemnly that the Chinese government remains unwavering in its resolve to oppose any external interference in Hong Kong affairs. We urge these forces to immediately stop any form of interference in Hong Kong affairs and China's internal affairs, and immediately stop condoning violent offences. Otherwise, they would lift the stone only to drop it on their own feet.
Whatever be the fuel, the result is unsavory for President Xi. In the best case scenario, it's bad press. In the worst case scenario, it's political instability that may spread. It's very much a crisis. Chinese troops have been seen on the streets of Hong Kong, just to intimidate for the moment. But who knows when they'll be pressed into action. Last month, President Xi had issued a warning. He said any attempt to divide China will end in quote-unquote bodies smashed and bones ground to powder. That's what the president said. He couldn't have been more explicit. Hong Kong is now officially in a recession. This has happened for the first time in 10 years. Hong Kong manages assets and wealth worth $6 trillion. $6 trillion. Global investors are worried, obviously. The tourism sector is the worst hit. The number of visitors has halved. Airlines around the world are cancelling flights to Hong Kong, and this includes Indian carriers. I could go on and on about Hong Kong, but to cut a long story short, Asia's business hub is now a royal mess.